Hi, I'm Joysy John, Director of Education at Nesta.
How prepared is Britain for the fourth industrial revolution?
There are some really interesting things happening. So, for example, there is greater emphasis on how technology can be used both within the classroom and outside, within the workplace, to build some of these skills that are important for the fourth industrial revolution. I think where more needs to be done is building a much broader curriculum, because what is needed is some of these skills like creativity, confidence, resilience, ability to learn, that is currently being pushed out of the curriculum due to an overemphasis on exams and league tables. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, are we building a society that is inclusive and diverse? So if AI is going to change the world, and it's not just about robots, it's everywhere. It's in our phones, in our computers. So who is changing AI? And are we getting enough women and people from disadvantaged backgrounds really shaping AI, writing the algorithms, designing systems? And finally, are we sort of building the skills, not just digital skills, but also the social and emotional skills that are needed to really thrive in the fourth industrial revolution? And I think there is some progress, but a lot more needs to be done.
And what are those things that need to be done?
I think three things. Firstly, the curriculum needs to be much broader so that you are focusing on multidisciplinary learning. You are not just learning maths and science or English, but you're also learning things like collaboration, communication, problem solving. So that's the first thing. The second thing that needs to happen is much more investment into R&D and research, so that kids and teachers are aware of things like machine learning, AI, and they're not afraid, but they are well prepared to be able to use it. And the third thing is changing the narrative from fear to hope and optimism, because we invented the machines. They are not here to replace us. Robots are not taking our jobs. We need to make sure that we change the narrative from robo versus humans to machines working with humans with a better process.
Some studies done by serious consultancies have suggested that 28% of jobs could be lost by young people from under age 24 to automation or AI by 2030. Books, as you will know, have suggested that something like 47% of United States jobs are at risk to automation. And there are many other statistics that we could spend all day quoting at you. What is your literal assessment on the risks to jobs in the UK with the arrival of the fourth industrial revolution, and also the number of jobs that you think will be created?
The first thing to note is a lot of these really scary statistics are based on just one thing, that automation is going to take away the jobs. But what we need to remember is that it's not just automation. There are many other mega trends like an aging population, rising inequality, increase in the green economy. So these things have an effect on each other. So Nesta has worked with Pearson and Oxford academics to really look at not only the insights from humans, look at trend analysis, and then combine that with machine learning to predict what are the jobs that are going to be high in demand and what are the jobs that are going to have decreasing demand. Now, the findings of that report is that only 10% of the jobs will see an increase in demand in the future, that's in 2030, and 20% of those jobs are going to see a decrease in demand. And we can sort of guess what jobs are going to be decreasing in demand, things like administrative services, routine tasks that can be easily automated. But the middle 70% is highly uncertain, because it, like Professor Luckin was saying, it depends on how we respond. And if we have an education and training system that is able to respond to these changes, we can sort of change the likelihood of these jobs.
One of the most challenging times in my life, my previous career as a teacher, was when I was a deputy head, a year 6 teacher and a special needs coordinator. And if somebody had have said to me at that time, there's this artificial intelligence that will take away all that bureaucracy, all the assessment, all the paperwork, all the individual learning plans, all of that, that would have been my dream, so I could have focused completely on the children in my classroom. So how do you see for teaching and learning and that work that goes on, that wonderful work that currently goes on in the classroom, how do you see AI supporting the teacher in the classroom and taking perhaps away that bureaucracy so that they can focus on the core purpose of supporting children, educating children, and what could be the barriers to that?
So your question is, what are the opportunities and what are the challenges for AI to be used in the classroom? I think in terms of opportunities, there's a huge potential to reduce teacher workload, so things like lesson planning, admin and data, reporting and assessment. And already there are existing technologies that can be used to help with those things. But what are the barriers? I think the key thing is cost. These things are expensive, and how do you implement it in the school when there are funding cuts? The second thing is infrastructure. These things are not going to work unless you have the basic infrastructure. And the third thing is training. You can have the best technology in the classroom, but it can just sit there. For example, the whiteboards when it was first introduced, unless you provide the right training, unless you bring humans as part of the solution, and you change the existing processes. I'll give you another example where a maths teacher who is running remedial class for her students, there are amazing tools that are out there that do personalized learning, gamification, just make it fun for kids, but it requires the computer to turn on and respond. And she resorts to just giving out a paper so that kids can get on and do their. So we are not going to change the process and the practice within the classroom unless we address these three barriers. And I do believe that there is a huge opportunity. It comes with challenges, but we can address it by bringing businesses, academia, and civil society together, because I think there is a real opportunity here.
What do you think business, for example, could do to kind of make sure that message is heard in terms of government?
I think the key thing to remember here is there is a lot already happening and more needs to be done. The first thing is the implementation of the career strategy, where there are some tools available for young people to make better career choices. So for example, there's data everywhere from DFE, from BASE, DWP, from HMRC around outcomes, destination outcomes, but we don't really use that. There's data available around what are the jobs that employers are looking for and what skills they're looking for. And Nesta has done a piece of analysis where we worked with Burning Glass to analyze 41 million job adverts to look at what are the skills that employers are looking for. So, get real-time labor market information rather than somebody sitting there and creating a skills framework or a framework for an apprenticeship. So I totally agree, you need more vocational options because 50% of the population is not going to university. So how do we make sure that apprenticeship is a valid option that is of high quality?
I mean, it's not even just that though, is it? I mean, those going to university themselves, are then underemployed or not having the skills for this fourth industrial revolution.
Absolutely. In fact, what was interesting to see is that computer science grads had the highest level of unemployment after 6 months of graduation. So why is that? If employers are crying out for technical skills, why is it that computer science grads have high levels of unemployability? It's probably because they can't communicate or they can't express themselves. And most employers, in fact 97% of employers say that they look for attitude and confidence and communication skills when hiring somebody. So why is it that we are not preparing young people for those skills?
Joyce, this is really a question for you. You mentioned 3 points: broader curriculum, changing the narrative, and R&D. On that broader curriculum, can you detail an ideal curriculum for a particular age group? Just explain what that might look like Monday to Friday.
Sure. So I'll give you a specific example from Singapore and from Malaysia. So within Malaysia, there's something called thinking schools that is being rolled out into more than 10,000 state schools, which looks at things like creativity, critical thinking, collaboration. And the way you would roll it out, or the way it can be implemented within the UK curriculum, is in 3 ways. Firstly, having real life problems that kids can work on. So rather than just making it as a maths class or a science class or an English class, can you bring in a real life problem that a business is facing, and how do you get them excited about what they're learning is important and is relevant? That's the first thing. The second thing is, a lot of kids, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, don't have role models. When I was growing up, I didn't know there was a job called software engineering. I didn't even want to be an engineer, but because I had a teacher who introduced me to computing, I sort of became a software engineer. So we have to take it for a given that we can't predict what jobs are going to exist. So we have to really make sure that we're preparing young people by having more touch points with industry, by really giving them mentoring and opportunities to work on real life problems.
How important will lifelong learning be, and accessing lifelong learning? How do we improve access to it as AI automation interrupts and disrupts our world, but also particularly around the current workforce? Clearly entry-level jobs automation poses greatest threat to. How do we ensure that those who may well be facing job losses can be reskilled and trained to contribute further up the chain?
I think lifelong learning is here to stay. With increasing automation at every level, people will have to upskill and reskill. So it is absolutely important. The question is, how do we make sure that we are providing people access to it? And I think there are three things we need to think about. From a learner's perspective, from an employer's perspective, and from a provision perspective, the person who's delivering the training. From a learner's perspective, what are the barriers, motivation, cost involved? So how do you address those challenges? Because somebody who is in a low-paid job, how do they sort of take out the time to upskill themselves? From the employer's perspective, yes, it is an investment for the future, so they need to play a bigger role. And I think we need to move away from this notion of let's tax them and give them the money to train them. I think if we made the case clear that they need to do this because it's in their best interest, it's the right thing to do, and they are future-proofing their business by training people, and maybe give out awards to employers who are doing it well, showcase best practices.
This is quite a well-trodden path, though, that you're talking about. Do we not need a better injection of purpose to the individual learners themselves that are actually then commissioning for themselves this sort of future-proof notion? Because the levy, great idea in principle, huge drop in numbers. Employer take-up, employer skills pilot, absolute farce, 350 million quid down the tubes, which was about putting employers in that space. Do you think we're enabling individuals to assess their place in this enough?
I think we're not doing enough, because if you think about what are the 5 barriers, there is motivation, there's leadership, there is culture, there's infrastructure, there's access. There are all these barriers, and we don't really think about solving that. Usually when people think about upskilling, they think, let's create a new online platform where people will learn. But for somebody who is having lots of challenges, just getting access to an online system is not going to solve the problem. So we need to address these other issues before we get to the access bit.
Having the wonderful philosophical discourse, as we often do at this committee, and as effusive and charming as Pepper and its kind may be, at which point will it be cheaper to use AI for certain employment, and how on earth are we going to avoid some kind of Luddite protest in this?
I think the question should really be, how do we use robotics and AI and technology to complement what humans do rather than replacing? Because I don't think we can ever replace teachers in the classroom.
No, indeed, and I think that falls into that 30% that was mentioned, or at either end, but that's 70% of which there's uncertainty, because this is clearly going to change employment practices, as you've said, and jobs, etc. But there must be a tipping point at which it will be technologically sufficient and economically cheaper to use this rather than people.
It's already happening, yes. Sorry, just on that point, companies, financial firms, law firms are already using chatbots and using AI to replace their paralegals, because it's cheaper, faster, they don't get tired, they work 24 hours when the machine is doing it. So this is already happening, but the question is not whether the person who was doing that job has lost the job, it's has their job changed? Have they gone on to do something more meaningful, more useful, that only a human can do?
Joysy, I wonder if I could just quickly follow up on something you said in your opening remarks. AI, is it going to level the playing field when it comes to inequality and social justice, or is it actually going to entrench disadvantage? And what can we do to stop that?
That's a really interesting question. It really depends on how we use AI. So on the one hand, you could say that schools that can't afford high quality teachers will start using AI, and hence, it will just make social inequality worse. Whereas on the other hand, you could say that AI is such a powerful tool where, if used right, it will be used across all schools because it makes the learning experience more personalized, more efficient, so that then it frees up time for teachers to actually build these skills like creativity, problem solving, critical thinking in young people. And I think what we need to be really aware of is, are we doing anything to address the huge diversity gap in AI? Are we doing anything to address the training needs? Because if we can do that, then I think AI will be a force for good.
Okay, just returning to a point previously, a lot of the stuff that's been talked about with the learning mindset does worry me a little bit, because I think when we start talking about that, the emphasis is always put on the individual to have the right mindset rather than the awareness of the environment in which that individual finds themselves. So I'd like to emphasise maybe more the points that Joysy made when we talked about the 5 different barriers that are there. And it just worries me if we talk a lot about learning mindset that it's almost, well, if you haven't achieved and adapted to AI, you've got the wrong mindset, not because you're aware of the barriers that are around you. And to build on the point that Lucy said, it was with her comments about how AI could make our world hopefully more socially just. How could the education system help using AI to make the world more socially just?
I absolutely agree that it's not just the learning mindset of an individual, the environment matters, and what matters more is the opportunity, because if there is bias, if people don't have the opportunity, and if people don't have the confidence, then the problem will persist. So what can we do to build social justice? I think you need a local partnership for AI in education and in business. You need to bring teachers, technologists, and learners together, and learners and teachers and employers need to be at the heart of this conversation.
Thank you again.